Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world that smells faintly of crushed lavender, overripe figs, and just a hint of conspiracy. Picture yourself in the early morning hum of ancient Rome. Not the marble monuments and gladiator fanfare you're used to, but the quieter corners where something strange is blooming. You're walking through the Forum Boarium, and tucked between the spice merchants and the fishmongers, you find them, the florists, not the pastel apron kind. No, these folks are cloaked in ivy-dyed linen, arranging petals with tweezers like they're handling state secrets. And, in a way, they are. Because this story isn't about war or emperors, well, not directly. It's about flowers, and the secret language they spoke. You'll see how entire conversations bloomed in bouquets, how lovers, spies, and senators used petals and leaves to scheme, seduce, and sometimes send warnings no one else could read. You probably won't survive this as a well-adjusted houseplant owner. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from anywhere in the world, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where our sleepy little history club is drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're following a trail of crushed blossoms and damp olive leaves through the narrow cobbled alleys of the Forum, where flower vendors whisper to one another in scents. The air is thick with rosemary and suspicion. You pass stalls of anemones, wrapped not for decoration, but for delivery to homes, temples, and occasionally prison cells. Roman florists weren't just decorative professionals. They were translators, couriers, matchmakers, occasionally accomplices. Most mornings, they were ignored, just another blur in the mosaic of city life. But those who knew. A cluster of violets wrapped in vine, a promise of discretion. A lone crocus tucked behind a fig leaf. Don't trust the bearer. And if someone ever handed you a bouquet heavy with rue and cypress, well, that wasn't a message. That was a eulogy. Historians still argue whether this was an organized system or a series of overlapping superstitions. Some think the whole idea is projection. Our modern love of symbolism retroactively painted onto a society obsessed with spectacle. But scrolls found in the ruins of Pompeii suggest otherwise. There are doodles, notes, lists of flowers with odd annotations, for forgiveness, for shame, for after he confesses. You brush past a stall where a woman ties bundles of hyssop with red twine. She winks at a passing magistrate and slides the bunch into his sleeve. You keep walking. You reach the oldest part of the Forum, where the sun hasn't yet burned off the morning chill. Here, under the broken columns, is a shrine still shadowed in myrtle branches, and behind it, the first florilegium. A flower letter box, if you will. People leave bundles here, anonymous messages, not written in ink but arranged, petal by petal, with devastating precision. A single sprig of mint tucked behind 3 blood-red poppies. That means, I forgive you, but don't come back. It's said this box predated the Caesar line, that long before Latin was etched on tablets, leaves spoke first. Now, don't get too romantic. Not all messages were love notes. Some were bribes, some threats, and some just the ancient equivalent of sending someone a passive-aggressive post-it. A wreath of wilted chamomile placed on a senator's doorstep. That's basically shouting, "You're weak," and we all know it, without raising your voice. Of course, there were rules. You couldn't just mix any flower and expect people to understand. Florists trained for years under masters who spoke the dialect of scent and stem. A misplaced fennel could change your meaning from loyal servant to snake in the grass. There's even record of a florist who was thrown into the Tiber for sending the wrong message to the wrong wife. Imagine that. Drowning over a daffodil. Still, the system grew. Rome, being Rome, loved a good code, especially one that let its elite speak in public while saying nothing the crowd could parse. That's the real magics of this language. It bloomed in plain sight. You pass a pair of twin boys tossing marigolds into a fountain. Their nursemaid scolds them. Those flowers are for the shrine, not for play. But you notice something odd. She picks up a petal, sniffs it, and pockets it without another word. You file that away. By now, the forum is waking. Soldiers clank past with bundles of laurel. A priest murmurs to himself while weaving a garland of bay leaves, each dipped in wine. And somewhere, from a shaded portico, a veiled woman watches you with a bouquet in her lap. One gladiolus, one iris, and a half-crushed tulip. You don't know what it means yet, but you will, because tonight you're going to learn how Rome spoke without words, how flowers became gossip, how scent became subtext, and how a simple daisy could ruin a man's career. And don't worry, we'll get to the emperor's pet florist. That story is as ridiculous as it is fragrant. But for now, just keep walking. The city's just starting to bloom. You slip into a shaded corridor behind the basilica, where the air cools and the scent shifts less floral now, more moss and marble dust. Roman stone keeps secrets better than people do, and in these echoing spaces, another kind of florist waits. Not the street vendor kind with sunburned cheeks and rough-cut bouquets. No, these florists cater to senators. You duck past two arguing scribes and find yourself beneath a portico where bundles of flowers lie in careful rows not for sale, but for selection. Laurel, of course. Olive branches, definitely. But there's also sweet marjoram, oddly placed. One bundle contains a sprig of wild garlic tucked into a rose's stem, an odd pairing, unless you knew what it meant. See, in the Senate, gestures are everything. A senator placing a leafed bundle on his desk might seem like he's preparing for a temple ritual. But anyone fluent in Rome's leafy lexicon knows better. That's a coded message, sometimes even a vote. Laurel crowns were already politically charged, worn by generals and emperors to signal divine favor. But what's less known is that couriers often accompanied those wreaths with accompanying posies, each one designed to influence emotion. Basil to inspire courage, mint for clarity, a sprig of rue. That meant you'd better change your mind before the vote tomorrow. Quiet, clean, smelled great. Historians still argue whether this was institutionalized or just a clever game among the bored elite. Some suggest there were actual Senate staff trained in floral influence, employed to seed certain emotions during heated debates. Others roll their eyes at that theory, chalking it up to the same kind of mythologizing that gave us Romulus and Remus being suckled by a she-wolf. But there's one compelling document, a half-burned scroll where a disgraced senator accuses his rival of using hyacinth oil to soften the resolve of weak men. That's oddly specific. You step into the curia itself, empty now, except for the scent of trampled thyme and crushed camphor. You imagine the room full, every bench occupied by a tunic-clad ego with a flower tucked in his sash. These weren't random tokens. They were psychological warfare. Think aromatherapy, but weaponized. There's even a fringe theory that the layout of the Senate's ventilation system was adjusted during Emperor Tiberius's reign to better circulate certain floral oils. Yes, really. One engineer's notes mention scented air designed to carry intentions. Whether that means actual meaning or just, please calm down before stabbing someone is still debated. You pause before a senator's desk, where something has been etched into the wood. A crudely drawn rose with one petal falling. Underneath, cave, beware. Could it be a warning left in haste? A symbol of betrayal, or maybe just a bored assistant doodling. You'll never know. But you do know that the fall of many men in Rome started with whispers, some carried by tongues, others by bouquets. It wasn't all threat and drama, though flower speak could be playful too. There are letters from young political hopefuls who sent entire posygrams to their patrons, thanking them for sponsorships with clever combinations. Violet's modesty, rosemary remembrance, and a dash of fennel flattery. A historian once joked that half the Republic was held together with floral compliments and veiled floral threats. You leave the curia and pass through the archway into the forum once more, where a young patrician boy is being taught the names of flowers by his tutor, not just the Latin words, but what each leaf supposedly meant. When the boy misidentifies chamomile as for courage, the tutor corrects him sharply. Chamomile is for resilience, not rashness, he says, like he's reciting laws. You begin to realize this isn't just superstition. This is literacy, a second alphabet made of petals and stalks. And like any language, it could be misused. There's a story about a senator who sent what he thought was a congratulatory bouquet to a victorious general, only to include a flower that implied impotence. He claimed it was an innocent mistake. The general didn't believe him. The general, incidentally, had that senator reassigned to a grain post in Gaul. Coincidence. You stop near a pillar overgrown with ivy, where someone's woven a floral message into the climbing vines. A twist of periwinkle, sage, and faded lavender. You don't know what it means, but it looks tired. Maybe goodbye. Here in this silent moment, you realize just how layered Roman life really was. They had the monuments, yes, the armies, the roads, but also this invisible undercurrent of symbolic language, so easy to miss, so devastating when misread. And tomorrow morning, when the sun rises over these stones again, another senator will step into the Senate, glance at the bouquet in his seat, and wonder, friend or foe. And the flower, silent as always, will already know. By midday, the sun bleaches the marble streets a blinding white, and you seek shade beneath a row of lemon trees near the Palatine Hill. The heat carries every scent sharply, now bitter citrus peel, warm olive wood, and beneath it, the faint perfume of laurel leaves baked into the crown of a dozing official. You linger near a marble bench where two young women sit with woven baskets of herbs and flowers in their laps, whispering in a rhythm so practiced it might as well be verse. One of them plucks a sprig of myrtle and tucks it gently behind the ear of the other. A flirtation. A promise. You've already learned nothing is ever just decoration, because now you enter the domain of romantic code. And nothing, not even love, escaped Roman bureaucracy. Laurel crowns may have symbolized glory, but in the private gardens of patrician villas, another kind of floral accessory told stories far messier. Affairs, heartbreaks, longing, regret. In a society obsessed with appearances, the discreet thrill of floral subtext was irresistible. Who needs scandal when you can simply tuck a message behind your ear? Historians still argue whether the practice of encoding romantic intent into flower arrangements was adopted from Etruscan rituals, or if it grew independently from Greek theater customs. Some even claim it was borrowed from North African bridal traditions, though Roman historians were famously terrible at citing their sources. Either way, by the time of Augustus, it had bloomed into a full social phenomenon. Imagine this. You're a young Roman man. You can't publicly court the daughter of a rival senator, not without risking your family's position. So, instead, you leave a garland of ivy, saffron crocus, and 2 pink rose petals on the steps of her father's home. If she responds the next day with a posy of myrtle and acacia, she's in. If it comes back with marjoram and dried mint, you'll want to start flirting with someone else. These aren't modern-day flower shop gestures. Each choice is deliberate. A wrong bloom isn't awkward, it's disastrous. In fact, there are love letters from the period that read like half code, half recipe. I saw your mother's lilies but missed your verbena. Was the rue on purpose, or just the hand of your maid? You pass a bronze statue of Venus ringed in delicate white blooms, not just decoration. They're messages. Fresh narcissus placed at her feet by a bashful novice priestess signals first desire. Wilting camellias from a jaded widow confess lingering grief. And if you ever see a single clove-studded marigold, that means I know, but some of the most complex codes weren't delivered to temples, they were worn. Wreaths and headpieces weren't reserved for warriors. Lovers crafted elaborate headdresses using leaves, ribbons, and herbs, each one narrating a silent emotional saga. Laurel twined with blue hyacinth. You honor me, but my heart breaks. Jasmine wound with iris. We bloom in shadows. And here's where things get delightfully scandalous. In a few dusty scrolls preserved in the villa ruins of Herculaneum, there's mention of floral duelists. Wealthy women who would try to outcode each other at social functions, slipping barbed botanical insults into their hair arrangements. One account describes a banquet where 2 wives attended with nearly identical wreaths except one contained a single rue sprig facing inward. The meaning, I forgive, but not forget. The other responded the next evening with rosemary and wormwood, signaling, I remember everything, and I bite. It sounds petty because it was, but that was the art, subtlety, revenge, and beauty, all arranged in a crown. And not just among nobles. In the tenement courtyards of Trastevere, flower girls sold miniature bouquets with pre-made meanings, some sweet, some naughty. A posy of red clover and honeysuckle was the ancient Roman equivalent of sliding into someone's DMs with, hey, a sprig of dead basil, blocked. You find yourself near a fountain where water spills lazily over stone, and an elderly man tends to a small cart of loose blooms. He notices you staring at a wreath braided with poppies, chamomile, and dandelion. Ah, he murmurs, the dreaming crown. You ask what it means. For longing that will never be fulfilled, he replies softly. Then, after a beat, adds, or indigestion, depending on who you ask. Modern scholars have tried to catalog these meanings, but they disagree wildly. The same flower could mean fidelity in one region, shame in another. That's the trouble with languages that aren't written down. They bloom differently wherever they root, like dialects with petals. Still, some symbols stuck. Laurel, always victory. Myrtle, always love. Rue, forever regret. And in those meanings, lovers found both comfort and danger. Because once you enter this language, you can't unknow it. Every flower becomes a sentence. Every bouquet, a confession. You start seeing the world not as colors or smells, but as layered intentions. So when you receive a single snowdrop next week from someone whose smile lingers too long, don't be surprised if you panic a little. That's the curse of understanding. You head downhill now, away from the marbled courts and toward the older streets of the Aventine, where dust kicks up with every footstep, and the scent of flowers shifts to something sharper, more bitter, more purposeful. Gone are the flirtations and love notes. These blooms are not sweet. They are tools, symbols of power, violence, and unspoken war. You pass a cluster of worn soldiers outside a tavern. One has a sprig of wormwood tucked into his belt. He's not trying to be poetic. He's sending a message. Wormwood for war. Bitter, resolute. You recognize it now, and suddenly the scowl he throws at his comrade carries more weight. Because in Rome, flowers didn't just symbolize romance. They could mark vendettas. You pause in a plaza where two families are arguing quietly but fiercely over a broken engagement. Neither side raises a voice, but both have sent offerings to the nearby shrine. One has placed a garland of yellow hyacinths, jealousy. The other, a crushed sprig of tansy I will endure. Historians still argue whether this darker side of floristry was used intentionally by the state. Was it a kind of emotional propaganda? Or did this underground botanical language just evolve in the cracks of Roman culture? Like weeds through stone. No one agrees. But there are clues. Burial sites in Pompeii feature graves marked with very specific floral tokens. Fennel for strength, marigold for grief, and sometimes rue for sins unspoken. Myrtle, once a pure symbol of Venus and love, could be twisted too. Paired with thorny broom or black hellebore, it meant the opposite. Your love is poison. There's even record of a woman who sent her husband a crown woven of sweet myrtle and deadly belladonna during his campaign abroad. Legend says he wore it into battle and never returned. You round a corner and enter a small open-air courtyard where a wedding is being prepared. White ribbons trail from wooden poles, and flowers are everywhere. Daisies for innocence, lavender for blessing, myrtle again, and everywhere. But one detail makes you stop. Near the bride's seat is a low bowl of scattered petals, arranged in a crescent. Poppy, willow, fern. You recognize the code. May your sorrow stay hidden. Not exactly the usual blessing. You remember reading about the florists hired specifically for funerals and weddings, not to decorate, but to deliver subtle messages of protection, warning, or accusation. A wedding might feature 3 garlands, one for love, one for fortune, one for caution. The bride would wear only 2. The missing third would tell the family everything. And the funerals, oh, those were even more charged. A senator's funeral might seem like a solemn affair, but pay close attention to the wreaths. If you see violets, rosemary, and iris, that's standard remembrance, honor, and faith. But if you catch a whiff of camphor or see a tucked-in thorn, that's a whisper of unfinished business, a quiet accusation, maybe even vengeance. In fact, There's a long-standing rumor that one particular gladiator arena had its gates decorated with fennel and rue before especially controversial matches signals to the audience that something unjust was about to happen. A floral protest. In plain sight, you approach a small altar tucked beneath a staircase. Someone has left a handful of juniper and a lone lily. Odd pair. Juniper meant cleansing. Lily could mean either purity or mourning. Taken together, a plea to be seen as innocent even if the gods already passed judgment. And sometimes, the same flower could say multiple things, depending on how it was placed. Upright fennel, strength in grief, but fennel turned upside down. Your time has ended. Scholars continue to argue whether these meanings were consistent across regions or if florists were just making it up and hoping no one would correct them. But here's where it gets even more complicated. You reach a wall inscribed with names, victims of a fire long ago. At the base, dozens of tiny bouquets wilt in the summer heat. Not the grand wreaths of nobles, just small, humble bundles. Dandelions, chicory, crushed mint. These were flowers of the poor, but they carried just as much meaning. Dandelions weren't weeds. Back then, they symbolized resilience. Chicory, hidden strength. Mint, memory. These were the flowers of those who had no statues built for them, no public tributes, just the language of petals. Left quietly under stone, you kneel beside one of the bouquets, and for a moment, the whole system clicks into place. This wasn't just a secret code for elites. It was a form of literacy, an emotional shorthand for the masses. Those who couldn't read Latin could still read this. And suddenly, the woman near the steps arranging a broken reed beside a carnation doesn't seem random. That's not grief. That's defiance. You step away, because now the flowers are watching, and you're beginning to speak their language. You follow a narrow path that curves away from the open squares and into the tangle of Subura, the district where the rules bend and sometimes break altogether. This is where Rome's skin shows its cracks, where smoke from cook fires hangs low in the alleys, and water trickles from places it probably shouldn't. Here, amid the chaos of taverns, workshops, and the occasional goat wandering too confidently through someone's doorway, is the quieter world of the guilds, blacksmiths, cobblers, candle makers, and, yes, florists. But not just any florists. These are the ones who keep secrets. You don't find them listed on public plaques. You find them through a friend, or a lover, or a well-placed bribe. You duck beneath a hanging curtain that smells of lavender oil and old charcoal. Inside, a dimly lit room opens up like a greenhouse hidden in a dream. Flowers everywhere. Hanging, pressed, pickled, dried. Some you recognize: marigold, hyacinth, myrtle. Others are twisted hybrids you've never seen before, their leaves furled like they're mid-whisper. A man in a green-dyed tunic barely glances at you. For purchase or for passage? He asks. You hesitate. Passage, you say, though you don't know what that means. He nods once and disappears behind a curtain. Welcome to the Florist Guild's secret codex. It's not a scroll. It's not even a book. It's a wall, a mural of sorts, created out of dried blossoms, meticulously pinned in precise formations across an entire room. Rows and clusters, diagonals and rings. Hash Ahmed's is not art. This is language. The guild, it turns out, keeps records not in ink but in arrangements, messages sent, meanings recorded, dangerous combinations retired. One cluster of black iris and yarrow is circled with a faint chalk mark. Below it, a warning: do not repeat. Historians still argue whether this guild acted like a secret society or simply preserved an old craft. Some call it theatrical nonsense, a marketing gimmick to make flower sellers seem mysterious. Others believe they maintained a real and evolving dialect of botanical symbolism, one that survived generations because it had to, because too many people were using it, relying on it, even fearing it. You notice one strange thing. Every flower combination is paired with a date, not just the day it was first used, but when it was last, as if meanings expire, or worse, become dangerous if repeated. The guild believed context changed everything. A flower sent on a birth date might bless, the same flower on a funeral day might curse, and when paired incorrectly, catastrophe. A famous story tells of a merchant who unknowingly combined time, bluebell, and vervain in a garland sent to his patron individually. Those meant strength, humility, and loyalty. Together, they formed a phrase now lost to time, but apparently so offensive that the patron withdrew all his contracts and banished the man's family to Hispania. One flower too many. You pass another wall where petals are pressed into wax tablets. Some are still fragrant. There's a violet that smells like summer and regret. A dried daisy that crumbles when you look at it too long. Beneath it is scratched. For the child that never arrived. You turn away. A guild apprentice no older than 16 shows you a set of tools. Obsidian blades for cutting stems at the proper angle. Beeswax gloves to preserve oils. And most oddly, tiny copper rulers. Each one is used to measure the distance between flowers in an arrangement, not for aesthetics. For grammar, the codex follows a strict syntax, primary flower in the center, modifiers on the diagonal, negations on the outer ring. Place a mint sprig too close to an iris. You've just turned a proposal into a farewell. You start to understand why the guild exists, not to hide the language, but to protect it from misuse. There's one more rule you're shown. It's whispered. Never send fennel at night. No explanation, just a slow headshake from the apprentice. It's bad. You file that away. Before you leave, the master florist reappears, holding a single scroll. The only written thing in the whole place. He doesn't unroll it. He just taps the seal Oppressed Daffodil. Hope, he says, or betrayal, depends which way you fold it. Then he smiles, kindly, and turns away. Outside, the noise of Subura hits you again like a wave, but it doesn't feel the same. You see messages in the spilled herbs near the curb, meanings in the garlands above the doorways, a cluster of rosemary on a windowsill, a prayer, a broken strand of ivy on the ground, maybe a warning. You're not walking through a city anymore. You're walking through a sentence, and every flower you pass is another word. The wind shifts as you climb toward the Capitoline Hill, carrying with it the strange mingling of sacred incense, crushed herbs, and something older ash, maybe something ritualistic. You're nearing the temples now, where flowers don't speak of love or vengeance. Here, they speak to gods. You pass the temple of Juno, its steps swept clean and lined with sprigs of vervain and rosemary. Not for beauty, not even for scent. For message, these are offerings. Yes, but also pleas, and complaints, and gossip. If the gods were listening close enough, in ancient Rome, temples weren't just spiritual centers. They were filing cabinets of divine correspondence. And the flowers, they were the stationery. You walk slowly up the temple stairs, watching worshippers slip offerings into carved alcoves, bundles of hyacinth for apology, crushed lavender for protection, and on one small plinth, just a single, perfectly dried chamomile bloom, balanced on a sliver of marble. That one. You know now, it means I forgive you, but don't think I've forgotten. Historians still debate whether priests actually translated these offerings or just played along for the sake of ceremony. Some temples, like those to Fortuna or Ceres, had dedicated herbal interpreters, men and women, who maintained ledgers of floral meanings. Others mocked the practice outright. There's a letter from a sarcastic poet, Martial, who wrote, "The gods have enough trouble managing the empire. Do not confuse them further with daisies." Still, the records survive, and they paint a compelling picture. You step into the shadow of the Temple of Vesta, where the famed Vestal virgins maintained their eternal flame. They, too, had a floral system, but theirs was stricter, codified. Here, flowers were not for emotion, but for record. Calendrical markers. One blossom changed every solstice, a different bloom each equinox. If a vestal changed the flower too early or too late, it was considered a sign. Of what? Depends who you asked. A good harvest, a political death, an omen of betrayal. There's one account half burned, preserved by accident of a vestal changing the calendula a day too soon. That same week, a popular general died of an unexpected illness. Coincidence? Maybe, but no one changed the calendula early after that. You move deeper into the courtyard behind the temples where smaller shrines dot the hillside. These aren't for gods with marble altars. These are for the household spirits, the lares and penates, the protectors of kitchens, bedrooms, and cellars, and their floral language, way more personal. You crouch beside one such shrine tucked into a garden wall. It's no taller than your knee, but someone has placed a small wreath of clover and olive leaves on it. The scent is grassy, fresh, comforting. A thank you, maybe. You realize that Rome's floral language didn't only go up to gods, senators, lovers. It also reached down to spirits, to ancestors, to the forgotten. The Temple of Saturn looms in the distance, where every winter, during Saturnalia, flowers were used to flip reality on its head. Slaves wore garlands. Masters gave gifts. The scent of marjoram and wine mixed in the air like a perfume of rebellion. The flower of Saturnalia, the iris symbol of messages, carried between classes in secret. A slave might tuck one behind their ear, its meaning obvious to another servant. There's more to this night than laughter. You walk past a marble pool where temple attendants are cleaning out wilted offerings. They do so with great care, plucking each petal by hand and setting them aside, not discarded, recycled. The blooms, once powerful, are now just quiet. But there's something reverent in how they're handled, like old letters that still deserve respect. One of them, the youngest, holds up a garland of acacia and rue and frowns. "Why would someone offer this to Jupiter?" he asks. An older attendant glances over. "They're not offering it to Jupiter," he mutters. "They're offering it about someone." And you feel that now? That weight of intention. Every flower left in these shrines is a story half told, a confession, a cry for help, or just a whisper of hope. There's even a temple long gone now, rumored to have kept a wall of rejected offerings. Those whose floral grammar was so confused or dangerous, the priests didn't dare interpret them. People say the wall wilted faster than nature should allow, that the gods, offended, took the meanings straight from the petals and left behind only rots. Silly myth. Maybe, but as you look back toward the temple gates, where someone has placed a perfect trio of blood-red poppies, grief, defiance, memory, you wonder if the gods truly were listening, or worse, if they ever answered back. The bells toll the hour. The temples close their doors. And the flowers, for now, go silent. But you know better. They're only resting. Twilight settles over the rooftops like a shawl dipped in wine. And with it comes a hush. Rome at dusk is softer, more secretive. Shadows stretch across columns. Lanterns blink to life. And somewhere in the distance, a lyre player plucks out a slow, melancholy tune. It's during this liminal hour, neither fully day nor night, that you hear the story of the emperor's florist. It begins, naturally, with a mistake. You're standing in the peristyle garden of a villa, once owned by a minor emperor's cousin. The mosaic beneath your feet depicts scenes of hunting and feasting, but one tile stands out, a woman holding a single narcissus and looking back over her shoulder. A detail easy to overlook, unless you know the story. Emperor Claudius, the one historians either pity or laugh at, had a court florist named Livia Primula. She wasn't noble, wasn't even formally educated, but she had a gift. She could read a room and, more importantly, scent it. She was known to adjust a banquet's garlands not for looks but for influence. Basil. If the senators needed to feel brave, jasmine if Claudius had a speech to deliver, lavender when his wife was angry, which was often. But Livia made a mistake, a single one. She added a stalk of delphinium, symbol of false hope, into the imperial bridal bouquet meant for Claudius's niece on her wedding day. A minor lapse, sure, but the bouquet had been designed with painful specificity, and the addition caused a ripple of whispers through the court. Everyone read into it. Was it a warning? A curse? A joke? Historians still argue whether she meant it or whether an apprentice inserted the wrong bloom. The records, of course, are silent, but the fallout was not. 3 days later, the groom-to-be drowned during a bath. Now, Romans were naturally suspicious. A garland placed wrongly was like mispronouncing a blessing. You couldn't unsee it. And Livia, she vanished from court. Some say she was exiled to a vineyard in Calabria. Others claim she lived out her years in disguise, selling flower bundles near the Aventine. There's even a tombstone with no name, just a carving of a primrose bound in twine, her calling card. But the strangest part, for years afterward, flowers at imperial ceremonies were simplified, no longer symbolic, just decorative, safe, beige. The language was deemed too risky, too volatile. Too true. You walk through the crumbling remains of another villa, where once the emperors held midnight feasts. Somewhere near the triclinium, you find a shallow clay bowl embedded in the wall. It's not for incense, not for coins, it's for petals. These were placed beside the emperor's seat so he could adjust the floral atmosphere around him. Claudius apparently preferred hyacinth and anise. Nero, unsurprisingly, liked only violets, deep purple, almost black. One scribe notes Nero once received a posy wrapped in laurel and snapdragon. He laughed, then had the sender executed. The message was ambiguous. Glory choked by pride. But that's the risk when you deal in metaphor. Even more curious, Caligula, the famously unhinged emperor, reportedly banned white lilies altogether from his chambers, not because of their scent, but because he believed they whispered. According to one account, he had a dream in which a lily told him the Senate was plotting his death. Now, did the lily actually whisper? Probably not. Did someone plant it intentionally to unnerve him? Maybe. And here's where it gets downright theatrical. During Domitian's reign, flowers were arranged into displays of loyalty. Guests at imperial banquets were assigned bouquets, and depending on which flowers were handed to you, you'd know if you were in favor or not. Red roses and bay leaves. You were golden, dogwood and nettle. Pack your bags. By the end of the Flavian dynasty, the emperor's florists were no longer just decorators. They were political agents. An appointment to the imperial florist role was considered both an honor and a death sentence. Most didn't last long. One even left behind a carved message inside his workshop. Let the petals fall where they may. I have said too much already. You pause at a low marble bench and breathe in the remnants of someone's garden. Crushed thyme, dried sage, a petal or two of faded hibiscus, their color long gone. You realize that even the emperors, with their power, palaces, and paranoia, couldn't control the flowers. They tried, but the meanings always slipped through twisting, adapting, rooting themselves into new soil. You rise and continue walking. Just as the last light fades, the path ahead is lined with myrtle bushes, humming with quiet life. Someone has tied a ribbon around one branch, pairing it with a single sprig of rue. It's not meant for you, but it's watching. All the same, night has fully fallen now, and Rome glows softly under oil lamps and hearth fires. The world has slowed, but not stilled. Somewhere, a cart rattles down an alley. A dog barks once, then gives up. You walk toward the edge of the Caelian Hill, where the air smells less of cooking fires and more of wet earth and silence. You've arrived at the edge of the necropolis. This is where Rome sleeps. The tombs rise low and squat around you, their facades chipped, their names half-faded. And yet, fresh bundles of herbs and flowers still dot the stones. They aren't for beauty. They're conversations, unfinished ones, messages still being sent, even after death. The Roman funerary tradition was dense with floral meaning, not just wreaths and garlands, but specific arrangements chosen with forensic care. The dead could be honored, accused, mocked, or protected with the right posy. And the funeral fern, yes, it was often the center of it all. You crouch beside a tomb marked with an owl relief, where someone has placed a mix of fennel, cypress, and wild sage. That's not a tribute. That's a whisper. Fennel for courage, cypress for grief, sage for truth. The combination might mean we know. Historians still argue whether these death bouquets were meant more for the living than the departed. Some suggest the funeral garlands were coded messages to those attending. You are forgiven. You are not welcome. You were never loved. It's passive aggression, yes, but also cultural poetry. And the dead? Well, they made excellent silent witnesses. You wander deeper, toward the wealthier tombs. Marble statues hold urns overflowing with preserved flower motifs, some carved, others inlaid with actual crushed petals sealed in resin. In one case, a mosaic depicts a woman scattering rose petals into a river. The caption, Spero tibi verba mea pervenire. I hope my words reach you. It's not just metaphor. This was belief that flowers could carry words, could become words. And so came the invention of the fennel scroll, a bouquet wrapped around a hidden note, written in invisible ink or charcoal, slipped into a grave at the last moment, ostensibly for the gods. In truth, for prying eyes. Couriers would later pay respects, recover the bundle, and deliver its message. That's floral espionage at its finest. But some messages weren't meant to be read, only felt. You pause near a child's grave. No writing. Just a clay figurine holding a garland of violets and acacia. The flowers mean remembrance and renewal. You wonder who placed it. A mother, a sibling grown old. Perhaps it's been replaced over and over again by strangers who understood its language even centuries later. There's a story from the reign of Antoninus Pius about a senator who died under mysterious circumstances. His funeral procession was lavish trumpets, horses, professional mourners, but someone snuck a single anemone into his wreath, a flower meaning abandonment. No one claimed it, no one removed it, but it was noticed, and the next week, his son was disinherited by a surprising Senate vote. Flowers don't forget, neither do people. You enter a mausoleum that once belonged to a baker's guild. Inside, niches line the walls, each marked with names and garlands carved in stone. One reads simply, Julia, who kneaded in silence and spoke with poppies, a poet's way of saying she expressed grief often and quietly. Or perhaps she left too many funerals behind. In the back corner, a single preserved bouquet sits encased in a jar. It's dusty now, and the colors have faded to husks. But even here, the shapes endure. You count rosemary, lavender, rue, and one lone daisy. Forgive me. Watch over them. I was wrong. I loved them. The words arrive unbidden, like the petals were whispering them all along. There are signs that some tombs became message boards of sorts. People would leave new bouquets not for the dead inside, but for others to read, especially during festivals like Lemuria, when Romans believed spirits wandered and the living could speak to the unseen. One infamous tomb, the Echo Stone near the Appian Way, was often found littered with identical wreaths, marjoram, chrysanthemum, and a single thornless rose. The meaning. Speak carefully. The dead are listening. People believed messages left there could travel to enemies, to lovers, to gods, or perhaps just to themselves. And even now, as you exit the necropolis, you feel as if you've been overheard, like every bouquet you passed filed you away in some invisible archive. The city remembers, the flowers always remember. So when the last tomb falls behind you and the moonlight returns, you look back just once. And of course, someone's placed a fresh bloom behind your path, a single narcissus leaning toward you in the dark. The lamps flicker lower now, casting long orange reflections in puddles and across walls still warm from the day's heat. You cross back toward the city center, heading for the baths. Those grand, steaming palaces where Romans came to cleanse their bodies, scheme in whispers, and occasionally exchange secrets bundled in flowers. You enter through a side passage of the baths of Caracalla, stepping into the hazy warmth like a sigh. The air is thick with steam, eucalyptus oil, and beneath that a sharp, peppery hint of crushed mint leaves. You follow it, drawn like a bloodhound. This is where the flowers became spies. Historians still argue whether the use of floral arrangements for espionage was formalized under the rule of Septimius Severus, or whether it emerged more organically, an accident of too many senators sharing too few towels. What is agreed upon, however, is that the baths were a perfect breeding ground for subtle exchange, because everyone came here: soldiers, poets, merchants, mistresses, ambassadors. No weapons, no scrolls, no witnesses, just steam, stone, and sweat. But if you knew what to look for, information floated just beneath the surface like the rose petals drifting lazily in the caldarium pool. You slide onto a bench near the edge of the frigidarium, watching a servant girl arrange 3 small bundles on a tray. One contains thyme and fennel. One has mint and nettle. The last is a strange twist of heather and pine. She hands them off to 3 different clients without a word. They're not for scent. They're codes. There are records, scarce, but fascinating, of certain florists working exclusively with bathhouse staff. Their job, to craft subtle, wearable arrangements for clients engaged in delicate political or romantic maneuvers. A sprig of clover behind the ear might indicate safety. A single strand of wild grass tucked into a sandal strap, surveillance. One military tribune famously wore an armlet of sage, myrtle, and dandelion on the day a rival accused him of treason. The combination meant I will be remembered as innocent. He was acquitted. Was it the floral message that tipped public sympathy? Maybe. Or maybe it just made him smell like someone worth believing. In the misty corners of the baths, you spot niches lined with baskets of leaves not for decoration, but for discretion. You imagine two clients meeting in the tepidarium, each pretending to admire a cluster of rosemary and yarrow, all while discussing troop movements in Dacia. It sounds ridiculous until you realize they didn't have encrypted emails. They had garlands, and sometimes they had decoys. You learn of one plot involving an adulterous affair between a minor nobleman and a senator's wife. The pair used the baths to pass messages via bouquets disguised as complimentary oils, a pouch of lavender and camphor for yes, bay leaf and asphodel for no. When suspicion rose, they added a third pouch full of meaningless clover and grass and passed it between each other publicly. It was fake. The real message had already been sewn into the cloth of the towel one of them carried. And then there's the odd case of the gladiator whose trainer claimed he never spoke before a match, but always bathed with a single daffodil tucked behind his ear. No one ever figured out what that meant, but he never lost. And one night, when he wore no flower at all, he never came out of the arena. You wrap a towel around your shoulders and move toward the gardens outside the baths. Even here, the language lingers. Planted carefully along the edge of the hedges are clusters of sage and rue, flanking every walkway like watchful eyes. You notice that some guests leave small offerings by the marble benches, folded leaves, twisted stems, even half-wilted blooms. Not trash, not forgetfulness, but deliberate. A phrase left for someone else to find, like scribbles in the margins of a book. You pick one up, a cluster of lemon balm, rosemary, and broken iris. The combination could mean you are not alone, but you are watched. Or perhaps, do not speak. They are already listening. Comforting. You sit on the edge of a cold stone fountain and listen as two men pass by, murmuring about grain shortages. One adjusts the satchel over his shoulder, and a tiny sprig of tansy falls out. Tansy means I will endure, but it also means you were warned. The floral language of espionage was always layered. That's what made it work. If you didn't understand it, you saw only decoration. If you did, you heard everything. By now, the baths have emptied, steam rising into the stars above. You retrace your steps past the basin, where a final wreath floats hyacinth and rue, drifting slowly in a circle. One scholar once called these bathhouse exchanges Rome's most fragrant form of treason. He wasn't wrong. And as you exit, brushing past ivy creeping along the gate, you notice something carved into the marble, half hidden by moss. A message. Words may be overheard, but petals speak in silence. You step into the early hours of night proper. Now, when Rome is hushed, when the laughter dies down and secrets settle like dew, the moonlight bleeds down across rooftops and peaks between the ruins, as if even it wants to know what happens next. You're in a residential neighborhood this time, tight alleyways, shutters closed, not a statue in sight. But even here, the flowers speak, not in grand garlands or temple wreaths. No, this is where the whispers happen, where leaf letters pass hand to hand. You duck into a courtyard tucked behind a baker's stall. It smells of yeast, of cracked tile warmed by the sun, and sandalwood. That last scent doesn't belong. It clings to a bundle tucked into a wall niche, a discreet posy wrapped in flax thread. No name, just a message. Mint, clove, and bay leaf. You're starting to get good at this. Come tonight, I will be brave. This is the world of scented lies, coded longing, and botanical betrayal, where letters don't just carry words, they carry feelings that must be hidden. In a society where scrolls could be intercepted, burned, or twisted into evidence, many turn to flowers as a safer way to send their truths, especially the ones with something to lose. Historians still argue whether the system began with the slaves or the senators. Some say it was the women of the insulae apartment blocks who first developed leaf letters as a way to communicate between floors and courtyards without drawing attention. Others claim it was the courtesans, whose entire survival depended on discretion. What is certain is that by the 2nd century CE, the practice was common enough to show up in street art. In one preserved fresco near the Esquiline, A woman sits with a flower in her hand, a smug look on her face, and the words he understood scratched above her head. You sit beneath a fig tree and watch the quiet movement of shadows. A boy appears at the edge of the alley with a small wooden tray. He sets it down and walks away. When you check it, you find 4 flowers laid side by side, as deliberate as punctuation marks: myrtle, lemon balm, a crushed marigold, twisted chamomile. Not a bouquet, a confession. Translated loosely: I still love you. I'm afraid, but I forgive you. You're not meant to know who it's for. You're not even meant to see it. But this is what made the language so powerful. Anyone could stumble into it, and if they understood, receive a message never meant for them. There were rules, of course. Messages could only contain 4 flowers, no more, no less, any more than that, and it was considered rambling. Any less, and you risked being misunderstood. Delivery methods varied: wrapped in cloth, hidden in a market basket, or sometimes hand-pressed into a cake of soap. One story tells of a woman who sent a leaf letter to her brother-in-law, warning him that her husband was plotting his death. She couldn't write it down, so she baked a tart infused with bay leaf, rue, and sweet woodruff. He understood. He fled that night. The husband died mysteriously the following year, choked, they say, on an almond blossom. Another tale, darker still, tells of a young girl who kept sending mint and rose petals to a gladiator she'd fallen for. He never replied. One day, she sent nothing but wormwood, folded inside ivy. He wept when he received it, but it was too late. She'd joined the Vestals the day before. You walk on, past shuttered windows and heavy wooden doors. On one stoop sits a small clay bowl, half filled with wilted petals. It's been used. A mailbox for feelings. You don't touch it. Leaf letters weren't always truthful either. There were forgeries. A political rival might plant a bouquet implying betrayal, just to ruin a marriage or incite a scandal. Flower arrangements were burned, denied, rewritten. Entire romances bloomed and died on the wrong interpretation of one sprig. And like all systems, there were experts and exploiters. A few florists began to sell letter kits, complete with recommended combinations for various emotions. Some even came pre-arranged for cowardly clients. Send this if you're sorry but don't want to talk. Send this if she's married, but you're persistent, sleazy, absolutely profitable, wildly. The city guard tried to ban the practice once, claiming it was a threat to public virtue and the sanctity of marriage. The result: 2 days of protest bouquets left on the governor's doorstep, every one containing wormwood, foxglove, and a cheerful daisy. Translation: bitter, toxic, and charming. Just like your policies, the ban was quietly dropped. You stop at a fountain, its water still running cold. Near its edge, someone has etched the outline of a flower, a crude drawing of a bellflower. Maybe, beside it, a name: Alia. No dates, no other words, just the flower. Bellflowers meant, I will wait until you return. It could be a memorial, or it could be a promise never answered. You rise again and keep walking, because now you see it everywhere. The posy on a shutter ledge, a goodbye. The trio of leaves tied to a pigeon's foot, a meeting place. The wreath tucked under a bench, a plea for forgiveness that might never be found. And all of them, waiting, quiet, fragrant, truthful in ways that words could never be. Because sometimes, in a world where scrolls could be burned and mouths were too afraid to speak, a petal was enough. You leave the winding alleys behind and move into the outskirts of a wealthier district where homes are walled. Shadows are longer, and secrets don't shout. They simmer. Here, the flowers aren't bought. They're cultivated, carefully, quietly, behind thick marble columns and under silk-draped balconies. Entire gardens grow not for pleasure, not for decoration, but for control. You slip through an open gate left unlatched either by mistake or design, and find yourself in the garden of guilty pleasures. The name isn't official, of course. No map marks it, but every whisper in Rome knows of this particular villa and its master, a patrician widow named Tullia Lucilla, rich, reclusive, and rumored to be fluent in every floral dialect the city ever invented. Her garden, ringed by high hedges, blooms with eerie precision. Here, every plant is a message, every bloom placed with intent. This is not a place of chaos or whimsy. It's a manifesto in root and petal. You move through rows of datura and belladonna deadly beauties that sway as if they know your name. Between them, gentler herbs peek through: yarrow, basil, violet. The contrast is deliberate. The scent here is dizzying, sweetness layered with warning. Historians still debate whether these private gardens were maintained for aesthetic control or emotional leverage. Some believe they were used as stage sets for whispered negotiations, proposals, or threats. Others claim they were simply therapeutic, a form of power for women who had little elsewhere in Roman public life. But Lucilla's garden, this wasn't therapy. It was warfare. She reportedly used flower-based invitation codes. No wax seals, no scrolls, just a single bloom sent by a servant to summon a guest. A red zinnia in a bowl. Come at sunset, unarmed. A stem of sage wrapped in silk. Come now, but lie once and suffer. A bruised tulip tied with mint. You owe me. One preserved note per steward details a party where guests were instructed to arrive wearing a flower of their choice. The unspoken contest. To send a message without uttering a word. The winner, they say, wore a single white daisy wrapped in gold thread, meaning, I know what you did, and I forgive you. But you won't forgive yourself. You move deeper into the garden, past statues half swallowed by vines. One depicts Narcissus, but the pool at his feet is real, and in it float only violets, dozens of them. Violet meant modesty, or, in Lucilla's language, your lies are showing. At the edge of the path, you find something stranger, a cluster of blooms grown into a pattern circular, symmetrical, deliberate: myrtle, chamomile, wormwood. These didn't just grow here. They were planted to say something. You trace the arc with your fingers, piecing it together like a forgotten prayer. It's a confession, roughly translated. I took her joy. I buried it in honey. I wore it like mine. Who was she confessing to? Or was it a ritual? A way to contain guilt before it rotted her from the inside? There are stories of Lucilla's guests disappearing, of rivals receiving garlands that wilted within moments. Superstition. Maybe, but no one denied her power, and everyone feared her lilies. In Lucilla's time, lilies came in two types: the white, virginal kind, and the deep yellow ones, rarely seen. That meant corruption disguised as virtue. She was known to wear one of each behind her ears, a contradiction in bloom. You pass a stone bench, beside which sits a crushed cluster of periwinkle and sweet woodruff. Periwinkle for memory, woodruff for humility. Together, they whisper, I remember what you thought I'd forget. And there, beneath the bench, hidden from sight, is a small clay plaque. Pressed into it are dried flowers sealed forever. It's on one stalk of rue, at two petals of heliotrope, a blackened rosebud. A single strand of time. The combination is complex, dark, and eerily precise. You translate slowly. I regret what I wanted, but not what I did. You stand there for a long moment, unsure whether to feel admiration or unease. Maybe both, because in this garden, morality isn't dead, it's just rooted differently. When Lucilla died, it said no one dared touch the garden. Her will forbade it. Let the flowers tell the truth in silence. She wrote, let the petals do what the priests cannot. No one speaks her name now, but the garden grows still. It watches, and maybe it judges. As you leave through the same unlatched gate, you brush past a new bloom you didn't see before. Lavender and black iris tied with a crimson thread. You don't know who it's for, but you feel seen. You're further from the city center now, following a path that hugs the ridge above the Tiber. It's quieter here, less marble, more moss. The kind of place where things are left behind on purpose, where the air smells like old stone, river mud, and something faintly floral despite there being no obvious garden in sight. And then you see them, flowers, not arranged, not bundled, just scattered. Dozens of petals left in deliberate trails along doorsteps, on benches, pressed beneath loose stones, as if someone walked this route every morning. Dropping secrets like breadcrumbs, you pick one up, a bruised pansy, stem snapped, next to it a curl of rosemary, then a smear of red pigment, not blood, wine, maybe, or paint. You're not the first to walk this path, and you're not the first to notice what blooms here, because this is where the language fought back. There was a time not long after the reign of Commodus when Rome grew wary of its flowers. Too many betrayals wrapped in posies, Too many funerals shadowed by accidental meanings, and too many women, slaves, merchants, and outsiders speaking volumes without ever opening their mouths. So, the Senate proposed a ban, not on flowers, of course not. That would be absurd. But on unauthorized arrangements, on unlicensed vendors, on improperly symbolic displays. In essence, a ban on the language itself. Historians still argue whether the crackdown was motivated by moral panic, political insecurity, or just good old-fashioned boredom. But the result was real. Florists arrested. Petal markets shut down. Codices burned. The city tried to silence its own garden. But Rome is nothing if not theatrical. You arrive at the Arch of Fabius, what remains of it, where a group of artisans once mounted a quiet protest. They didn't speak. They didn't riot. They left wreaths, hundreds of them, hung from columns, draped over statues, placed in the mouths of broken fountains. But they weren't random. Each one followed the rules of the Guild Codex. Each one sent a message. One wreath of poppies and lemon balm. We see what you've done. We rest, but not forever. Another of thorned rose, fennel, and wormwood. Your power is bitter, and we are not afraid. A garland of daisies soaked in vinegar. You will be remembered for what you tried to erase. The message spread not by rebels, but by grandmothers, bakers, children, every citizen who knew the meaning of a single bloom. And suddenly, the very thing the Senate tried to control, this subtle language of leaves, became a roar. Authorities began removing the wreaths, burning the flowers. But more appeared, tied to pigeons, left in bathhouse drains, even carved into bread crusts sold in the forum floral codes baked right into daily life. One record from a nervous magistrate's diary reads, "They have turned petals into knives, and I cannot tell where the blade will fall." You pause beside a statue of Minerva, where someone has tucked a single red clover beneath the toe of her sandal. Clover meant promise, or we're not done. And here's the eerie part. The crackdown didn't work. In fact, it backfired, because by trying to suppress the floral language, the government confirmed how powerful it had become. What was once a quiet system used for flirtation and grief had now evolved into a full-blown resistance. Florists became folk heroes. Petal bearers, what we now call couriers, operated like smugglers, tucking flower bundles into baskets of fish or grain. One was even caught with a bouquet disguised as a bundle of kindling. He claimed it was for his hearth. It actually said, "Burn the decree, keep the code." You move down a sloping alley where bricks have crumbled into stair steps. Here, under a loose stone, you find something preserved, a flattened bouquet, bound in copper wire and sealed with pitch. Someone went to great lengths to hide it. You open it carefully. Lavender, rue, crushed marigold, a thread of ivy. It reads, "They silenced my voice, but not my grief, and never my roots." And that's the moment it hits you. This wasn't just about flowers anymore. It was about survival. The ability to speak without permission, to love in secret, to mourn in public, to protest subtly, and be understood by those who knew how to listen. The floral code wasn't a language. It was a resistance. And even now, centuries later, fragments of that rebellion linger. A wedding bouquet placed upside down, a wreath with one flower missing, a garden that blooms only in odd-numbered groupings. Most people don't notice, but you do, because you've learned how to read it. And the city. Ancient, cracked, unkillable is still speaking. The sky is silvering now, just the faintest line of dawn threatening the eastern horizon. But Rome isn't waking. Not yet. This hour belongs to the past, to the fading petals, and to the quiet unraveling of things once believed eternal. You find yourself back near the Tiber, this time at the edge of a collapsed garden wall, its roots poking through like the fingers of something long buried. And it's here, as the cool air stirs the last of the night's perfumes, that you feel it. The language is dying, not all at once, but like the slow browning of a petal left in the sun. This section of the city was once rich in flower culture, home to the villa florists, temple garlanders, and the elite whisperers who made fortunes arranging bouquets that could make or break a marriage. But now, the stalls are gone. The guild murals faded, the flower crates replaced with figs, fish, and copper wares. You step into what remains of an old florist's shop. The door's gone. The roof, half collapsed. But on the back wall, still clinging through the soot and moss, you find fragments of the codex, a faded arrangement of dried blooms pressed into plaster, ivy, basil, a flake of camellia. You try to read it. I was loyal. You were not. That's what the flowers say. The floor is littered with old stems, as though someone tried to keep the rituals going long after the world stopped caring. A protest in petals, or maybe just habit. Historians still argue whether the decline of the floral language was a casualty of empire collapse or just cultural boredom. Some blame the Christians' flowers, they claimed, had no place in scripture unless tied to martyrdom. Others cite the economic downturns that made symbolic bouquets feel frivolous. In hard times, who can afford metaphor? But deeper records suggest something else, something quieter, that as Rome fractured, so too did its unspoken agreements. Without a shared system, a shared rhythm, even the flowers stopped speaking. You see it in the mismatched garlands carved on tombs from the later centuries. Laurel, next to rue, next to kitsu, cabbage. The meanings become confused. The syntax broken. Messages collapse into floral gibberish. One wreath preserved from the 4th century contains 11 types of flowers. 11. No grammar, no spacing, just chaos. A final scream into the dirt. Still, some clung to it. A few stubborn priests incorporated flower symbolism into their rituals, masking the old codes as harmless decoration. One monastery garden was laid out in precise symbolic patterns. When questioned, the abbot replied, "God made time speak softly. Who are we to silence it?" A sly rebellion, but even that couldn't hold. You wander into what used to be a gathering space now, a ruin overtaken by weeds. But in the center, someone has cleared a ring, fresh earth, a sign of something still alive. In the center of the ring lies a new posy. 3 flowers, snowdrop, rosemary, and forget-me-not. It is not fancy, not coded like the old days, but it says enough. I remember, I mourn, I still hope. You sit beside it for a while, watching as light breaks slowly over the city's highest towers. It's soft. This light gentler than torches, less theatrical than moonlight. The kind of light that makes ghosts look like memories instead of warnings. There's a story half legend, half whisper that in the final years of the old empire, a group of florists tried to record the entire language, every bloom, every meaning, every nuance. They met in secret, compiling what they called the last lexicon of leaves. It was never completed. One fire, one sack, one frightened apprentice who ran into the woods with a single bundle of samples and was never heard from again. But perhaps that's not how languages die. Perhaps they don't. Perhaps they just sleep. And when you round a final bend and see a woman sweeping her stoop with a posy tucked into her apron, and a boy carrying wild thyme in his fist without knowing why, you realize the meanings are still here, muted, warped, but breathing, like seeds buried too deep for spring. And if someone were to whisper them aloud again, carefully, clearly, maybe the whole garden would bloom once more. The first rays of sun are just beginning to warm the rooftops, but down here on the monastery path lined with moss and dew-kissed stone, it still feels like midnight. Your steps slow as you enter the garden. Not a secret one. This time, not guarded. No coded entries or unspoken rules. Just a simple, square enclosure behind a crumbling stone chapel, hemmed by low walls and silent prayer. This is where the language found its last refuge. Among monks, among silence, among those who believed that if petals once spoke, they might speak again if only someone listened long enough. You kneel beside the edge of the garden. Lavender, rosemary, sage, nothing unusual at first glance. But then you notice the groupings, not by soil needs or harvest cycles, but placement, geometry, alignment, like stanzas in a forgotten poem. Historians still debate whether medieval monks deliberately preserved Rome's floral language or simply stumbled into its bones while tending their herbs. The evidence is frustratingly sparse: marginalia in prayer books, cryptic carvings on well lids, pressed flowers hidden between psalm pages. But the most telling record is a single manuscript, Codex Sylvanus, a 12th century monastic gardening manual. On the surface, it's practical watering advice, root rot prevention, recipes for salves. But buried within are passages that read like riddles. Rosemary, for the memory of she who endures. Time to ward off the tongue of deception. Do not plant mint near lavender unless sorrow must linger. Instructions, allegory, or code. You brush your hand along a row of yarrow. It's planted between fennel and myrtle. A pairing that makes no culinary sense, but symbolically, it's an old phrase. You will remember me, and love will ache because of it. Even here, long after Rome's collapse, someone was still speaking the old tongue. But it wasn't just memory they were preserving. The monks adapted the language, shaped it into a new grammar, less sharp, more sacred, less seduction, more solace. Instead of betrayal, they paired rue with peace lily. Instead of power, they turned laurel into repentance. Instead of warnings, they grew forget-me-nots beneath the stained glass windows so the sun would paint their petals onto the chapel floor. You enter the cloister's shadow and notice the walls are covered in climbing ivy carefully trimmed. At first, you think it's decorative, but then you notice the cuts form a pattern, repeating, not random. The ivy spells something. You can't fully translate it. The dialect is different, evolved, but one phrase repeats often. Speak gently. Even the leaves are listening. One friar long dead, his name faded once wrote in his margin notes. The world shouts, but the garden prays. His garden journal lists not only bloom times and soil pH, but emotions he felt each morning while tending each plant. And whether the blooms responded in kind, you realize they weren't just keeping herbs alive. They were nurturing memory, a spiritual form of code. Messages weren't passed by bouquet here. They were grown, lived with, and harvested when the soul was ready. One monk supposedly grew a patch of calendula and didn't harvest it for 7 years, not until he forgave someone who had wronged him in his youth. The morning he did, he cut the petals and left them in the chapel. No note, no sermon, just orange blooms in a bowl. The others understood. There's a legend of a wandering woman who arrived at the monastery, ragged and soaked in rain. She didn't speak, just handed a friar a bundle of mint, pansy, and crushed camellia. He wept, took her inside, fed her. She stayed for the rest of her life, tending the garden. No one ever learned her name, but the flowers she grew still bloom every spring, always in threes, always in silence. You pass a small sundial cracked down its center. Around its base, someone has etched symbols of various blooms. You spot hyacinth, iris, wormwood, but one is scratched out so deeply it's just a scar. Beside it, the Latin. Some truths are too heavy for even the roots. You stay until the light touches every bed, and the bees arrive first timid, then insistent. Their hum joins the rustling of leaves, the splash of a fountain in the corner, and for a moment, you understand the monks perfectly. This wasn't preservation, it was penance, and maybe prayer. Because when a language dies, the people who loved it don't always let go. They carry it in gardens, in gestures, in silence, and sometimes, if you sit long enough among the petals, it speaks back. The sun finally crests the rooftops now, gilding the cobblestones in a kind of quiet, accidental ceremony. The city stirs behind you, distant sounds of carts rolling, roosters far too proud of themselves, shutters creaking open, but where you walk, the world stays hushed. You're moving through what remains of Rome's edge, not a marketplace, not a garden, just a patch of overgrown earth behind a broken aqueduct, where wildflowers bloom with the stubbornness of memory. And this is where it ends, or begins again. Because this final place, it's not recorded on any map. No emperor ever walked here. No monk tended its soil. But scattered all across it are the flowers from every age of this long, tangled language. You recognize them now like old friends. The defiant fennel, the mourning poppy, the hopeful rosemary, the deceitful marigold, the forgiving daisy. And nestled in their center, almost hidden by weeds and wind, is a bundle bound in twine. Not new, not ancient, just waiting. You kneel. Inside, the petals have faded to husks, but the shapes remain, carefully placed, intentionally. You read them like a story. Sage, for protection. Rue, for regret. The clover, for hope. Heliotrope, for devotion. And one lone narcissus, for truth or vanity, depending on who's reading. The message isn't clear. Not exactly. Because here's the trick. The language always played, it never gave answers, only reflections. Historians still debate whether the floral language ever truly had a final keeper, a last translator, someone who knew every bloom by name and meaning and tone. The truth is, the system was never owned. It belonged to everyone who needed it, every lover too afraid to speak, every protester with no platform. Every mourner who needed a language quieter than tears. Maybe that's why it faded. Or maybe that's why it never truly will. You walk slowly through the overgrowth. A stone juts out, half sunk in earth, with a carved petal chiseled into its surface. Beneath it, 3 words in Latin. Per floris manimus. Through flowers, we remain. No one knows who carved it. No one needs to, because now you're the one holding the meanings. Not in your hands, but in your head. And they don't go away. You'll see them tomorrow in the bundle left on someone's desk, in the roadside bouquet tied to a lamppost, in the way someone arranges their herbs on a kitchen counter without knowing why. You'll notice when a friend gives you a sprig of mint, when a stranger wears a violet pin, when you pass a grave site and smell crushed thyme in the grass. And maybe you'll start leaving your own messages, one bloom at a time, because the language never needed saving. It just needed remembering. And now, it's yours. So now, here we are. The story's quieted. The last petal's been read. The garden gate is slowly swinging closed behind you, not locked, just soft with age. Your feet are dusty, your hands faintly scented with lavender and old soil. And your thoughts are slower than when we began. You can still feel the weight of the posies you never received, the ones meant for someone else, the ones you imagine sending now, even without a florist's license or a guild-approved stem cutter. Because even if you don't say them out loud, you know them. The apology, the warning, the longing, the goodbye, it's all there, buried beneath the petals. And maybe, tonight, the next time you see a flower, it won't just be beautiful, it'll mean something. A whisper, a wink, a mirror. Maybe you'll find yourself reaching for rosemary when you think of someone gone, or leaving a violet on a stranger's bench just because it feels right. Maybe you'll start keeping your own little codex, just a scrap of paper, just in case. The world's loud, but the flowers, they're patient. They wait. So let them. Let yourself. Close your eyes now. Breathe deep. Let the scent of stories fade into the hush of sleep. You've learned a language most people have forgotten, and somewhere, maybe in a dream, a flower will bloom in your hand, and you'll know exactly what it's trying to say.